Thank you for your presence. Thank you for being here. It's really an honor for me to be here in this room, within the wonderful drawings, within this building and within this, just surrounded by all those wonderful drawings. And it's also an honor to me to introduce to you Michelina Wautier. So I suppose that you never heard about her, and I think it's not your fault, because I do not even know art historians who knew her name before the exhibition we organized in Antwerp last year. And just to give an impression of her originality and the quality of her work, I'll show you some kind of a patchwork of paintings by Michelina. I hope you are convinced of the quality and that you like what you see already now. We had this exhibition in the museum Mons at Antwerp, and this is just an interior view on which you are looking just in the direction of the most famous work of Michelina, the Triumph of Bacchus. It's a painting of a width of about 4 meters. We will discuss it later. I just showed to you, I've shown to you the painting in the exhibition, because I like to tell something about the organization of the exhibition. For example, on the left, you are looking at the interior of the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna, and you see how delicate and complicated it was to bring the painting with the Triumph of Bacchus out of the museum. But it became even more complicated when the painting arrived in Antwerp and had to be brought to the third floor of the Mons Museum. So it was a wonderful experience, and in Antwerp it took about 6 hours to have the painting installed in the museum. As I told you, there was an exhibition, and here you see the cover of the catalogue, which was edited on occasion of this exhibition. So when you're discussing the talent of women artists, it's really important to wonder who this woman was. So who was Michelina Wautier? We know that she was born in Mons, in a rather rich, wealthy family, and around 1640 she moved to Brussels. She always remained unmarried, had no children, and important is the fact that she shared a house with her brother Charles, and Charles was also a painter. And another thing that's really important, and this has been very decisive also for her career, is the fact that Archduke Leopold Wilhelm, who was staying in about 10 years in Brussels in the mid of the 17th century, so he was collecting 4 of her paintings. And this is, of course, an indication for the appreciation she got during her life. Just to show you where you must imagine, let's say, the position of the city of Mons. So it's about 50 kilometers from Brussels to the south. So she was born in Mons and afterwards left Mons together with her brother to go to live in Brussels. So nowadays we know about 30 paintings by her, and half of them are fully signed and dated. And we are very pleased that this is the case, because without this signature it would have been really impossible to attribute paintings to her. So when you want to start research on the oeuvre of one artist, of course you need some reference points. And this is what we had thanks to the signed paintings. Now maybe you know already something about historical women artists, but in many cases they were just concentrating on one genre. For example, I don't know if the name of Clara Peters does ring a bell, but she was a very famous paintress of still lifes. And she's really very famous, and works by Clara Peters are in museums around the world. But the most extraordinary thing in connection to Michelina is the fact that she was painting a variety of themes. So she's the author of portraits, of history paintings, genre paintings, and she even painted 2 flower gardens. So maybe you got already an impression when I showed you the patchwork at the beginning. It's really not exaggerating when you say that her technical virtuosity has been immense. As I told you, she was painting a variety of genres. Her iconography is extremely original, and something that's also very typical for her that is the fact that she was a very sensible paintress. So in every painting you feel a kind of sensibility that might be called feminine, but I know this is a very delicate, maybe a delicate hineininterpretierung. But there is something that's really specific for her, and that's also specific, I think, for women artists. And another thing that's really surprising is the fact that she was painting paintings of all formats. So she used rather small panels, but also painted this Triumph of Bacchus with a width of about 4 meters. So we are going to discuss, let's say, 3 aspects this evening. I just will give a very short introduction on the tradition of women artists. Secondly, I will say something about the difficulty of retracing sources on Michelina, for example. And in third instance, we will try to make some kind of a reconstruction of paintings by Michelina. So when you're thinking about women artists, it's really quite evident that it's not easy for you to, let's say, to draw up a list of women paintings who were active in the past, because there haven't been that many. And the way everyone was thinking about women artists is very well reflected in a note coming from the journal of Albrecht Durer, the very famous 16th century German artist. I suppose you know his name. So he was also staying in the Netherlands in 1521, and he was visiting one day, he was visiting the Flemish painter and miniature painting Gerard Horenbout. And when he was a guest in the house of the painter, he met the daughter of the painter. And this is what he said, what he wrote in his diary. The painter Gerard Horenbout has a daughter who is 18 years old, and she painted a miniature representing Christ. I wanted to buy it, and I had to pay 1 guilder for this. It is unbelievable that a painting made by a woman is so expensive. So he was not that much, how can I say, surprised by the fact that she was painting, that she was able to paint this small representation of a Salvator of Christ, but he was really surprised that he had to pay 1 guilder. And 1 guilder was also the price that he asked for miniature paintings and small portraits he made for other people. So this is really an indication. The Netherlands also have been visited by Lodovico Guicciardini, who was a very famous Italian author, and he made, in the second half of the 16th century, a description of the Low Countries. And it's an indication that he already, in this book, published in the 16th century, he wrote that there have always been many women artists in the Netherlands. And he just gives some examples, such as Levina Teerling. She was born in Bruges, but she became to live as a paintress at a Tudor court. And this, of course, very amazing to see that this Levina Teerling, who was the daughter of an artist, but who came from, let's say, a bourgeois artistic family in Bruges, that she managed to become a kind of a court lady, and she was very close, for example, to Elizabeth I. We know this because also Elizabeth I gave her some presents on occasion of Christmas, for example. And it's really very complicated to retrace paintings by Levina Teerling, but the one you see, it's just a small miniature, and this gives an indication of the kind of works she made. The same author, he also referred to, for example, Maria Bessemers. And Maria Bessemers, it's an interesting person because she was the mother-in-law of Peter Bruegel the Elder. And as the ambassador already told you, this year, 2019, will be the year of Peter Bruegel in the Netherlands and also in Vienna, where you have this wonderful exhibition that's started already. And he's, of course, one of the most important painters of the Flemish tradition. So, and his mother-in-law, she educated his sons when he already died, because the two sons were only 6 and 4 years old. So their father could not give an introduction into painting, but it was his mother-in-law who did. So it's also an indication of the activity of female painters. Another rather well-known artist is Catalina Van Emerson, and I just showed 2 paintings by her. On the left side, you see a self-portrait of this woman, and on the right side, you see a very beautiful portrait of a young woman. This is just a kind of introduction. So keep this in mind. This is the kind of paintings women painters made during the 16th century. And it's interesting also to refer just one moment to a Korean painters. She was painting, let's say, also in the 16th century, and she introduced a very decorative genre in Korea called the shokundo. And it's interesting to see that women artists in the 16th century in the Netherlands were in fact doing more or less the same things as, for example, this woman artist in Korea. So I just introduced some women artists being active in the 16th century in the Netherlands. And now I will try to say something about the sources we have to discuss the life of Michelina. So when you, we'll go back a moment to the family in which she was born. I said already she came from a rather wealthy family in Mons. Her family was partly of aristocratic origin. And we know that her forebears in the male line, they all had been aldermen of the city of Mons. And it's also important to see that, to know that her father, Charles Wautier, he was also in the service of the Count of Fuentes, who was fighting for the King of Spain, Philip IV, in those days. So it was an important family, and there was a connection with the army of Philip IV. Now, Michelina's father, he married twice. So first he married Barbara Lee, and they had 5 children. And in the second instance, he married Jeanne Georges. And Jeanne Georges was the mother of Michelina. So, and the couple had 7 children, amongst them 2 painters, Charles and Michelina. As I said, they were both unmarried, and they moved possibly together around 1640 to Brussels, and they lived in the same house. And the question is if Charles Wautier introduced Michelina into the arts or vice versa. This is a problem we will never solve, I think. But it's important to know that Charles Wautier, he was an official painter working in painting in Brussels. He became a member of the guild. And at the moment he became a member of the guild, in the register was noted that he was trained in another country. So buitenlands geleerd. It means he was educated somewhere else. There is no reference to a concrete country, for example, but it might have been Italy, because there are a lot of Italian influences in his work. He was an official painter, Michelina was not. So we do not know when she obtained, for example, her master's title, because it was not done for women to be registered into the guild's registers. So when you want to know, to learn more about a woman living, working in Brussels in the 17th century, you, of course, you have the feeling that you should do more work and that you should try to find some extra archival evidence, and we tried to do this, and we came across a lot of information, but it did not, let's say, it did not brought to life Michelina herself. For example, we did not find, for example, for example, a letter by her or something that has to do with her personality as such. But we know that they lived together in a very beautiful house, so Charles and his sister Michelina, very close to the Église de la Chapelle in Brussels. So this is the Église de la Chapelle. So, and when you follow the arrow, so this is this is taken from the place where they were living together. So it's really the heart of the city. Most interesting part for you is, I think, coming to the reconstruction of her oeuvre. I just will introduce some works. I will not show you all the works by Michelina, but I think it's interesting to have some overview in a chronological order. Maybe you should just look, and maybe you shouldn't think too much, because it's worth looking at it and just enjoying her paintings. So the start of her career was this engraving. It's the earliest dated oeuvre we have, and it's engraved in 1643. So at this moment she was still very young, and when you look at this portrait, the original was a painted portrait, but this hasn't been preserved. But when you look at it, you see immediately the quality of the head. So this was not a woman artist who still had to learn a lot. She was already a very prolific, high-rank artist at this moment in the beginning of her career. As I told you, the original was a painted portrait, and this we know because there is an inscription beneath the portrait of this man, and this is saying Michelina Wautier's Pinxit. So there is no question who the author was of this very interesting engraving. We were always supposing that she must have painted other paintings before 1643. And I was really very pleased and very surprised when a couple of months ago I got this, the image of this portrait from Christie's London, and they just asked me if I had any idea regarding to the attribution. And I immediately recognized some elements of the, let's say, the style of Michelina. You will see some elements of this style coming back in the following slides. And it's really interesting because it's a huge painting of a family. And it's in a way a portrait historié, because the father and the mother are here represented as Isaac and Rebecca, and they already have a large family, as you can see. This is a painting that will be sold in a couple of weeks. So it's really interesting to see that thanks to the exhibition, she has become much more famous, and she also has become more expensive. So I will show you some other examples in a minute. Look just at these portraits coming from the left back of the painting, and it's amazing to compare, for example, these heads with the portrait of Andreas Cantelmo, so the captain you've seen before. You see how she was able to let's say, to pin down the characteristics of these two men, for example. And as I told you, she has a very sensible way of registering children, for example. Look at this little girl. She's a bit melancholic. She's dreaming, and it gives a very good indication of the way in which she started her career. So these were some paintings illustrating how she started. Now, from 1646 onwards, we have another kind of paintings, and we will see that the themes will become more, that there will be a lot of variation. The themes will become more varied, and we will start with, for example, this portrait dated 1646, and it's a portrait again of an officer. So I told you that the family had something with the military context, and she made several portraits of, for example, officers or captains. And here you have another indication. This painting is fully signed and dated, and you see that the kind of style she adapted from the beginning of her career with this portrait of, engraved portrait of Cantelmo, it's continuing. While we were preparing the exhibition, we also came across this painting. It's a huge painting, preserved today in the Grand Séminaire in Namur. And it was one of the colleagues Walloon colleagues from the KIK IRPA in Brussels who discovered the painting, and it was in a very, very bad state, as you can see from this picture. It's the mystic marriage of Saint Catherine, and you see that Michelina already, it's signed and dated 1649, already at that moment she was able to paint a scenery as this one here. So a religious scene with some very large biblical religious protagonist. So I show you this one, and you see how dark it is, and here you see in what a bad state it was when it was taken from the wall at the moment that it was prepared to come over for the exhibition. And it's also interesting to compare it with the, let's say, the final state of the painting when it left the restoration labo of the KIK in Brussels. So it was in this way that it entered, in the end, our exhibition. And we are very grateful to the Fondation Roi Baudouin because they offered us 50,000 euros in order to have the painting restored. Now it's in a good state of preservation and it will return to the Grand Séminaire in Namur, where no one ever before had seen it. Just two details of the same painting. Maybe you were really looking forward to see a self-portrait of this woman. I think when you look at the self-portrait, you immediately realize that she was extremely self-confident. She is not hesitating, let's say, about her talent, her position. It must have been painted somewhere in Brussels, must be dated around 1650, and she's introducing herself as a full master. She's holding her palette and also some brushes, and it's interesting to see that she's painting at the moment she is representing herself. When you look at the detail, you see how realistic she was registering herself. It's of course, it must have been, I suppose, a bit idealized, but at the same time, it's realistic. You see that there are some irregularities, for example, on her skin. So it's a very, in a way, selfish and self-confident painting. I just show you a detail of her negligee, and it's interesting because usually women did not pose in this kind of manner because it was too much of a negligee. I just show you again the upper part of her body, and you see that she just unbound her chemise. This is really, something that was not really frequently done. And it's also, I think, a manner in which she tried to show that she was at her ease. When you look at the canvas on which she's painting at the right, and when you come close, you see that she was painting the head of a man. So she was preparing this portrait while using that painting. So it's very characteristic for, let's say, the Flemish painters in Antwerp active in the first half of the century. A very beautiful detail is also this small watch. It's lying on the painter's easel, and it's of course a reference to time. This kind of watches were extremely expensive in those days, and it says something about the wealth of Michelina, I suppose. And it's of course also a detail that has a symbolic meaning because it's a reference to vanity. It's a reference to time that is always passing. Yeah, and it's something extra she added to the self-portrait as a kind of, well, let's say, in order to nuance. So look at me, I'm a very famous woman artist, but I know that time is passing and that fame will not be forever. When you compare, for example, the self-portrait of Michelina with the self-portrait of, let's say, the Baroque star of women artists, Artemisia Gentileschi, it's easy to make a comparison, and there are some aspects that are really the same, and there are, of course, other aspects that are, completely different. When you look, for example, at the manner in which she is showing her breast and the way in which she is turning to the canvas, it's completely different. And it's more Italian, but in a way they can be compared, and I hope that after this lecture you will be sure, you will be convinced that she is at least as important as Artemisia Gentileschi is. Just to show, to illustrate how famous Artemisia was in her days, I show you this French drawing from 1625, and it was made by this French artist because he was full of admiration for the right hand of Artemisia. So contemporary artists were really admiring women artists when they were, let's say, as good as they were themselves. Maybe you also are familiar with the name of Judith Leyster. She's an excellent paintress, Dutch paintress, working mainly in Haarlem in the first half of the 17th century. And this is one of her best works. It's a self-portrait, and look at this, it's completely different because she's laughing and in fact, she's posing in a very relaxed way, which is not the case when we look at the self-portrait of Michelina or of Artemisia. So she has been very famous, but she stopped painting at the moment when she married. So, and yeah, from that point of view, we can be happy that Michelina did not marry at all. So it was no, for her it was no problem to continue painting throughout her life. So the paintings we discussed already can be dated before 1650. And I hope there is still something of Sherlock Holmes in you. So, and I hope you will be interested to look together with us for 6 paintings by Michelina, all signed and dated, that are missing today. And we were hoping very much that for the exhibition, some of them could be retraced. So we launched already this how can I say, this announcement. Please look together with us in order to retrace these 6 paintings about 2 years before the opening of the exhibition, and we never had one reaction. So we know, for example, that there has been a cycle of the 5 senses, and they were painted on 5 different canvases. And for the last time, they appeared on an auction in Paris, 1975. And on that occasion, they published a very small auction catalogue. And on the cover of this catalogue, there was this reproduction. So this is the only reproduction of the 5 canvases with the 5 senses we know. So imagine, I was still sleeping at the 5th of August. I didn't have to work. And there was a telephone call. And I have 3 children. And I thought maybe so early in the morning, something must be wrong with one of my children. And I got up and I got a phone call from one of the descendants of the family de Wautier, because the family of Wautier has become de Wautier, and there are still descendants from the same family. And the son of Guylain de Wautier, who's a very nice and helpful man, Benoit de Meus, he called me and he said, just, can you believe I found the 5 senses in the private collection in Brussels. This collection has nothing to do with my family, but I'm sure that these are the paintings you are looking for. So of course, I asked if I could visit the collection immediately. I had to wait for 1 day, and he sent me already the painting you see on your left. And as you can see, when you're looking for a painting that's very much similar to the illustration you see on the right, of course, he was convinced that he could be sure that these were in the Brussels collection, that these were the 5 missing paintings. So I went to see the 5 paintings in the Brussels aristocratic collection, and they were all hanging in the same room. But when I came nearer, it was, yeah, immediately I saw it. These are not the original paintings, but are copies. So this was such a, yeah, it was really disappointing. And yeah, let's say my My fear has been confirmed by the fact that they are not signed, not dated. And we know from the auction catalogue from 1975 that the original paintings were dated and signed. So it's very strange to see that her paintings were as cherished, as loved, that they were also copied by, I suppose, another master, because the quality is not as high as the quality of the paintings by Michelina. We are also still looking for the pendant of this painting. So I told you Michelina painted a variety of themes, and she also made some very beautiful flower garlands. And we know that there are two of them. So we have this garland with a dragonfly, and there was another one with a butterfly above the garland. So the other one was sold in Amsterdam in 1985, and it's unbelievable because it's fully signed, fully dated. Yeah, we could not find it anymore. So we were looking everywhere. We contacted museum curators, also gallerists and so on, but no one could help us. But anyhow, we have already this garland in order to look at also the quality of the painting. It's really amazing. It's painted on panel, and the panels were marked in Antwerp. So for sure, Michelina bought her panels in Antwerp, and she painted these garlands on a panel just in order to have a more refined style, a detail of this garland. And maybe you've seen that this painting has something which is really special. When you look at both sides, you see that there you can see a kind of skulls of oxes. And indeed, it's an iconographical motif, and it's a reference to the antique Bucrania. And this kind of Bucrania, this kind of skulls, are always a reference to vanity. As we saw already in the representation of the small watch, also in this garland, Michelina wanted to introduce something that had to do with vanity. So look at all those wonderful flowers. They are really wonderful, and I could register them in a perfect way, but they will all be gone tomorrow. And it's a very original way to introduce aspects of vanity, because it has never done in this way by any other Flemish or Dutch painter. But we know that she was inspired by the relievos in the interior of the Areopagus in Rome. I hope that you can see that also here we have this garland, you see, and also we have on the side we have the oxes, the skulls of oxes. So question is, of course, did Michelina went to Rome and did she see the Areopagus Augustae? Yeah, it's not to be confirmed, I suppose, because it might also be the case that there were circulating some engravings after the relievos of the Areopagus. So it's not sure, but of course it's an indication of her intellectual interest. This is again a reference to the painting that's missing. Now we go to a further phase in her career, and you will again meet this variety of themes. This is in fact a study made from life. I'm sure because it has been rendered in a realistic way, and the young boy is not really looking at you. It was something she made from life in order to have it used in a broader composition afterwards. This is also something that's comparable. And just to give you an indication of the way in which Michelina has become more and more famous and more expensive, I just show you this example. So it was initially, sold in Paris with Tajan in 2016. And there it was attributed to Jacob van Oost. Yes? And it had an estimation of about 4,000 to 6,000. At that moment it was sold for 28,000 euros. And only some months ago, only some months after the sale in Paris, it was offered for sale at Christie's, New York. And look at the price of this painting. So it was sold for nearly $500,000. Yeah? And it's an indication of the appreciation of the work of Michelina. You should realize that there are not too many women artists in a European context. There are not too many, and most of them are not, I have to be very careful, but most of them are not first-rank painters. So when you have a woman artist such as Artemisia, such as Judith Leijzer, such as Michelina, there's always a lot of interest. Another example is, I want to introduce to you, is this portrait of a Jesuit. It's a wonderful portrait. I hope you agree. I just show a detail. When you look at this head, it has been influenced also by Italian 16th century art. Think about Titian, for example. It's a very, very interesting painting. And on this detail, you can see that there is an inscription. Do you see this? An inscription in Chinese. And this inscription, together with the signature and the date, has led to the identification of this Jesuit. It's Martino Martini, who was very famous in his time. And he was also very famous because he was the author of the first atlas ever made of China. He was staying in China for the most of his life, and he was traveling between China and the Netherlands. And in 1654, the date of the painting, he visited the Archduke in Brussels. Yes, and on occasion of this visit, I suppose that he must have been portrayed by Michelina. Just to make a comparison, the only portrait that was known before the portrait of Michelina of this Martino Martini, this Jesuit, is the one you see at your right. It has just been, it's a woodcut, and it just has been filled out with some colors. So when you compare the physiognomy and the head of the man on the right side with the way in which Michelina portrayed him, I suppose that you're immediately convinced that it's something completely different. She did make portraits. She also made portraits historiés. They are portraits, but the specific thing is that these two charming girls are posing as little saints. On the left you see Saint Dorothy, and on the other side you see Saint Agnes. So they are posing as a little saint, and the atmosphere of the painting is also, I think, influenced by this dramatic, the dramatic life of the two martyrs. And it's again a very sensible approach that she was showing here. Look also at the colors. It's in a way she used all kinds of colors, and especially also the red, just in order to attract your attention. The color of red is always a color that you use as a painter to attract people, to charm people, to be as convincing as an artist as you can be. I show some very beautiful details, just to let you see in which manner she could paint all kinds of details. Look, for example, at the hairdress. Look also at those very beautiful eyes. So always in her paintings there is a sense, a touch of melancholy. It's something that's very specific. I just photoshopped two because I thought you can better see the details of the hairdress at the right. You see also this it's really, yeah, this armoring gaze also of those girls. Here you see detail of Dorothy, of St. Agnes again. You also, on this detail, you can also see the brush strokes. Do you see this? Usually in the past, women painters were painting rather meticulously, yes, and very trying to paint as careful as they could, usually using also rather small formats. Michelina didn't. Yeah, she used her brush, and you see that she was so self-confident, and she was so skilled that it was no problem for her, for example, to paint the blush and the cheeks, as you here see. We already know that she was a good paintress of flower garlands. Here you see another indication of her skill in representing, for example, some fruits and paintings. We have always done some technological research on paintings by Michelina. We are working together with university, the Department of Chemistry of the University in Antwerp, and we already scanned, for example, the Saint Dorothy in order to check if the colors we are seeing at this moment are the same as the colors she used in the middle of the 17th century. And when you look, for example, at the slide on your right, you will see that the blue of the dress has changed completely. And it has to do with some chemical processes. Yeah, I'm very sorry. Look again. You're discussing this part. Yeah, you see the, do you see this? The robe of this little girl, and it's greenish, grayish, and when you compare it with the reconstruction of the original pigments, you see that it has become something very different. But the red is always there. Portrait historien, but also some religious scenes, just as this Saint John the Evangelist. It was bought by a young Italian on a brocanterie fair somewhere in Torino. Yeah, he was walking there on a Sunday morning, and he saw this painting, and it was damaged, and it was very, there were layers and layers of varnish on, and he liked it. And he bought it for 300 euros, and he took it home, and he told his mother that he had bought something. And his mother was a gallerist, and she said, "Oh no, you never know what you should buy. You did make a wrong choice. It's not interesting at all." So, and they had cleaned it, and at that moment, the full signature of Michelina appeared. And of course, we were very happy to have also this painting at the exhibition. Meanwhile, it has been restored in a wonderful way. And you see that again, it's a painting that's really charming and really trying to convince you. There is something very sensitive and very emotional in the way she paints, for example, saints. Look at this detail. Again, look at the brushes, the touches you can see. Michelina also painted all-day life scenes, as you have here, for example. It's a very beautiful scene of two young boys blowing bubbles. Yeah? You see, they are just playing. It seems to be just something that's, something. There's not too much happening, but it's just a scene on occasion of which the two boys are being amused and like to play and blowing bubbles. And of course, this is a representation of bubbling boys, but at the same time, as I told you before, Michelina is again referring to the vanity. The bubble is, of course, the incarnation of vanity. Yeah, when you're blowing a bubble, it will be away within two seconds. And this is also why she painted here this old book, and also the candle, you see, and also the, I'm looking for the word, zandloper, the hourglass. Yeah, I think it's an hourglass. Yeah, so all kinds of objects referring to vanity. We have here detail, so just an occasion to see how she managed to render the physiognomy of the children. They are very spontaneous, very close to each other. Here you see how he's bubbling the the bell, and you also see some details of the manchette of the vest of this young man, and you also learn that she has a style that could also be very detailed. So she was an excellent painter of textures. She liked to paint all kinds of textures. For example, look at the tapestry, look, for example, at the cape, and also at the hand. She tries to make every aspect of the painting as realistic as possible. Last period we know that she was painting is the period in which she was really active and in which she also had a lot of ambition. So she tried to paint huge canvases, for example, with religious themes. Now, this painting is not that huge, but it's a typical example of a painting that could be ordered, for example, by a cloister or by an abbey. It's a bit too large, in fact, to have it in your private house. And this is interesting to consider because when she was painting this kind of paintings, we suppose that she must have been in order to paint it. Yeah? So as a woman artist, when you are painting, it's always a sign of honor when other people order paintings from you. Yeah, for example, when there was some I don't know, some abbot or some religious group of women. I'm just thinking about cloisters. We have some examples. They were just trying to acquire a painting by Michelina. And this is the education of the Virgin. And look again into the expression of the face. You see, of course, the mother of Mary, Saint Anna, and also Saint Joachim. And look at the details of the painting. You again have the impression that this girl is resembling very much the two young saints, Saint Dorothy and Saint Agnes. Again, a detail of the mouth. And here you have a detail of the face of Saint Anna. So she was very good, very keen in contrasting, for example, different materials, for example, different types of skin, different types of textures, and so on. Another large painting with a religious subject is this one. It's an Annunciation. It comes from a collection, in fact, a private chapel in France, and maybe it was already ordered from France during the life of Michelina, but we do not know for sure. And here again, we can see and observe that she likes to for example, render all kinds of textures. Look also at the colors. For example, this light yellow, in contrast with the blue, is reappearing on many occasions. Look, for example, also at the carpet on the table. Here again, it has not been described as such. You don't see every aspect of the textiles, but she was just giving an impression. Yeah? You see how she managed, just by using just a few different paints and by using a broad brush, that was able to have this tapestry rendered in this way, and as colorful. So it's also something that adds to the general composition of the Annunciation. Here you see, for example, also a detail of the wooden ground. I will show you again. Yeah, look here at, for example, at the carpet. We saw this detail, and look also at the parquet. Do you call parquet? You know what I mean? Yes, the wooden floor. And you even can see the nails on the... yeah, look at this. It's really very well done, but it has never been described. It's a suggestion of wood in this case. She also made, after 1655, the most wonderful portraits you can imagine. For example, this one, it was sold with Christie's Paris a couple of years ago, and it's now in the private apartment of a London banker, and it's really an amazing work. When you look at the position he's holding, and this really austere gaze out of the painting. It's really a wonderful painting. It's my most sincere conviction that this painting should be reproduced in every book on portraiture of the 17th century, because it's such a unique painting. For example, look at this detail, then you see in which way she managed to, again, to catch the personality and the character of this man. He too is a captain. He too was someone who was fighting for the Spanish king, Philip IV. So when you look well, he's wearing a part of a harness. Yeah? So he was a commander or an officer of the army, and it is as such that he has been characterized by Michelina. There are some arguments to suppose that this must have been one of her brothers. She was also a genius coming to painting hair and all kinds of hairdresses. Look at these hair, it's a combination of all kinds of colors. So you have some brown, some red, some yellow. It's really, these curls are moving in a way. In the beginning of this lecture, I told you that it's really important to know that the Archduke Leopold Wilhelm, who was staying for 10 years in Brussels in the mid of the 17th century, that he had 4 paintings by Michelina in his collection. Yeah, and this is a very important indication of the fact that she was appreciated that much that even the Archduke, who was one of the most famous collectors in those days, that even he wanted to have 4 of her paintings in his collection. And here you see a painting by David Teniers representing the Archduke in the midst of his collection. In this inventory, so we have a reference to 4 original paintings from Miss Wautiers coming from Mons in Netherlands. Yeah, I started referring to this quote because we know, thanks to this inventory, we know that she was coming from Mons. So, and this was the start of our archival research in the city of Mons. But here we have the confirmation that, again, there were 4 paintings by Michelina, part of the collection of the Archduke, when the collection arrived in Vienna in 1659. And the 4 paintings are still in the collection of the Kunsthistorisches Museum today. So 3 out of the 4 are representations of saints. We have twice a Saint Joachim and once Saint Joseph. So it's a religious scene, of course. It's the representation of a saint, but at the same time you see that it's an interesting painting. So you don't have to know that this is a saint. Yes, you have the impression that it's nearly some kind of clochard. Yes, she was walking in the street, and she must have invited all kinds of men to sit for her in her workshop when her brother was in her neighborhood, of course. And she would have had the possibility in this way, in this manner, to register all kinds of heads, young men, older men, as you see here. Look, for example, at this detail. Here again you see her skill in representing hair, for example. You see the brown, black hair, and then you see that his beard is already more or less gray. And also look at the fact that there is no nimbus, no, do you know what it is? No aureole? Do you know what it is? Yeah, there's not a real indication that it's a saint. It's just a human being. Look at this, the lilies are, of course, a reference to the purity of Saint Joseph. There's also this Joachim reading, also very interesting painting, as is the 3rd representation of a saint. But most important is, of course, the Triumph of Bacchus. Now we are dealing with the painting you saw in the beginning, when they were just holding it on the staircase of the Kunsthistorisches Museum. And it's an indication that the painting has been in the Kunsthistorisches Museum since the start of the beginning of the museum, and it has never been attributed to Michelina until the mid of the 20th century. And even the director of the Kunsthistorisches Museum, who knew about the inventory in which the paintings are described as being by Michelina, he could not believe that a woman could ever make a painting of such dimension and of such a quality. And for this, the painting was in the catalogue as being by Frans Wouters. Of course, there is some resemblance between the name of Frans Wouters and Michelina Wautier, but of course, it was a misunderstanding and a misappreciation of her skill. Now you see this Triumph of Bacchus. As I told you, it's nearly 4 meters wide, and it's a fascinating procession of Bacchus. I will show you. This is the god of the wine. So Bacchus is in the... Yeah, you see it? Yeah, Bacchus is in the middle. So, and he's in the center of the procession, and you see all kinds of men and satyrs just accompanying him. And here you have a woman, just a bit distancing from the procession, and she is looking out of the painting, and this is a self-portrait of Michelina. So this is really even more surprising than everything else, because you have a woman halfly nude, and she is introducing herself as someone who is following the procession of Bacchus. So this woman can be related, according to, let's say, the theme of the painting, can be related to drunkenness, lust, and so on. So it's really a statement that she makes here, and it's the more surprising because we are in the mid of the 17th century. It means in the mid of the Counter-Reformation, a period in which everyone was focusing on, let's say, the purity of the iconography. Yeah? And everyone wanted to have as many religious representations as possible. And themes like this, based on antique sources, weren't popular at all. So just to convince you of her inventiveness and her extreme technical virtuosity, look at some details. So you have here, so this Bacchus lying on this kind of a wooden bench, and you also have the other men surrounding him. And looking at this painting, you can even be more sure that she must have had the possibility to draw and paint from life. Yeah, you cannot represent all kinds of nudes. Look at all those males in the composition. So you have very beautiful young men, you have very beautiful old men, you have the different colors of the skin. So she must have had the possibility to draw and paint from life. And this is really exceptional. Still in the 19th century, there were all kinds of discussions if it was acceptable that women could paint after male nudes, because it was not done, of course. And Michelina must have had the possibility, and it was, we presume, thanks to the fact that her brother, who was also a painter, was living with her together, and I suppose they were sharing the same workshop. So, and when he was there, it must have been possible for her to make this kind of studies. Look also at the different expressions of the face, and the most interesting face is, of course, the one of Michelina. Maybe it's a bit idealized, but at the same time, she does not look as an ideal woman. She's recognizable as such, and she's just watching out of the scene and looking at you as passing by. And it's interesting also to compare, for example, the way in which she's looking with the way in which the man on her left is looking. So it's a very rude face, and he's fond of her and he wants to seduce her, but she has no interest, as far as as we can see. There's also a very beautiful detail of this god of the wine. So it's in the center of the painting. So it's in the center of the painting, and it's really strange that she's focusing, in fact, on this part of the body of Bacchus. And he's rendered in a perfect way. So look at his skin, and he's a bit too fat, as you can see, but it's all rendered in a very detailed and very perfect, technically seen, very perfect way. As you can see from this painting, she also was a painter of animals. It's a goat, of course, which is a reference to lust. I just make this comparison, but I show you here. It's a comparison to lust, because the goat has always been the symbol of lust, of libidine. And we know that also, for example, antique sculptures may have inspired her when she was painting herself just in front of the god of wine and in the company of this goat. When you look, for example, at this Roman sculpture of a Maenad, or as you would call it also Bacchante, this is also a possibility. She is standing there and just looking aside a bit and holding a cup with grapes in her hand. The same theme you know maybe from one of the frescoes of one of the houses, most beautiful houses of the city of Pompeii. So it's a comparable scene. So she must have been familiar with this kind of representations of, let's say, the context of bacchanal scenes, where you have on the one side a man who is looking at this woman. Maybe there's also a chance that she was inspired by a book of emblems edited in Italy in 1604 by Cesare Ripa. And there, for example, you have an emblem, and it's an indication of libidine. So it's a personification of lust. And when you look at this woman, you see that this woman is also represented just in front of a vineyard. No, a vineyard, you know what I mean. In front of some benches of grapes, and she is also posing there in the company of the goat. So, and she must have been familiar with this kind of tradition, but it's the more surprising because it tells something about the way she must have felt herself, the way in which she wanted to introduce her in the company of Bacchus. And maybe it's hard to understand that she did it, but maybe the commission came from the Archduke. We know that he was an art lover. He was collecting hundreds of paintings during his stay in Brussels, but he was also a lover of music. He organized the first opera ever in Brussels in 1651, and we know that he also invited, for example, French dance masters, Italian musicians, all to come over to Brussels in order to, let's say, to raise the richness and the, how can I say, just help me, the riches, and also the fame, in a way, of his art in Brussels. Just to show you something, we know that even the Archduke loved to dance, and there have been some manuscripts preserved in which, for example, members of the court are represented as dancers and at the same moment as servants of Bacchus, as you can see. So he also has those grapes on his hand and on his chest, and he is dancing. So this is a reference to the kind of festivities Leopold Wilhelm was organizing at his court. So, and this may also be a confirmation of the fact that he might have ordered the painting of the Triumph of Bacchus. Also, the fact that it was taken by him to Vienna is another indication that, yeah, it's acceptable that he was in fact the one who commissioned the painting. It's also, it would be very strange when it was not a painting on commission, because when you're painting a canvas of about 4 meters, it's a very expensive job. So usually you had to order a painting before, and on the basis of a contract, there were already made some decisions regarding the payment. At his court, there was also a French dance master staying, Pierre-Adam de Lagrenay. He came from Paris, and he stayed for a couple of years at the court of Leopold Wilhelm. And he had a kind of account book, and it's very interesting. It's unpublished. It's very interesting because he was just registering in this account book every day to whom he had given some lessons to dance. Yeah. So, and he noted all the names of the courtiers who was teaching, and this is really interesting because thanks to this source we know who was passing at the court and who was in the company of very close, let's say, to the Archduke. And at the end of this small book, he noted that he had bought some paintings during his stay in Brussels, and he also refers to one painting he bought from Miss Wautier, a painting of Bacchus on the 17th of January 1650, and he paid 25 florins for it. It was rather a lot of money. So it's really interesting because it's another indication of the fact that Michelina was known, was famous at the court of Leopold Wilhelm, and that also this master of dance, coming from Paris, was interested to buy one of her paintings. Here you have just a detail of the note in the account book of Pierre Adam de la Grenée. There's but one drawing known by Michelina, and that's the one you see here. It's a study after an antique bust, and it's also indication that she loved to study from life or starting with studying from antique, for example, cast. And this is as every other male artist started his career. Yeah, you would wonder, how do you know that this is a painting by Michelina? This is a drawing. It was sold somewhere in Berlin about 10 years ago, and this is the only drawing we know. So we only know that it is a drawing by Michelina because there is a signature on the back of the drawing. Otherwise, we would never have, never have considered that she could have been the author. I hope you can read Michelina Wautier, Fake It. So, and it's at the bottom of the first side of the drawing. And as I told you, there are still new discoveries to do. There is one which is really very attractive. It came up at auction in May 2018, and it was sold in Cologne, and it was bought by one of the most famous collectors in Antwerp, Fernand Huts, who is the director of the cartoon Nazi in Antwerp. He already has 2 other paintings by Wautier, but he loves her, and of course he is a keen, how can I say, manager, and he has a keen eye, so he thinks it's a good investment to buy paintings by Michelina. You see here the detail, and I show also this painting again because it will be sold at Christie's London on the 6th of December, and it's another example of her early work and, in fact, assembling all the different qualities she will further develop during her life. Look at this, it's also a detail which refers to the, for example, the beautiful girls, Saint Agnes and Dorothy. Also here you have this melancholic expression as children from time to time have. So just to conclude, who was Michelina Wautier? I hope I did convince you of the fact that she was really unique and brilliant. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that no other woman artist from the early modern period in the world was as exceptionally gifted, original, and versatile as she was. But just 2 other minutes. There is, of course, also Peter Paul Rubens, and I suppose that you're familiar with the name of Peter Paul Rubens. And now we are in 2018, and during this year you had all kinds of festivities and projects going on in Antwerp because of the year of Flemish Baroque. And on this occasion, I also want to say something about the fact that we are looking for, how can I say, patrons, supporters for the edition of the Corpus Rubenianum. So Rubens painted about 2,000 paintings, not alone, of course, but also working together with his atelier, with his workshop. And since the early 60s, there was set up a catalogue raisonné of all the paintings by Rubens. In the end, there will be 50 volumes. There is no other painter in the world who will ever have, I suppose, a catalogue raisonné of 50 volumes. So all the paintings of Rubens have been or have to be registered in this corpus. So you see the series that has been realized already. There have been edited 4 volumes during the 2 last years, but of course we are still preparing other volumes on the paintings of Rubens, and whenever you have some interest, you can already become a patron of the Corpus Rubenianum and a member of the Rubenianum Fund for, let's say, rather small amounts of offering to be offered to the Rubens Fund and the Rubens House, in fact. So when you will become a member of the Rubenianum Fund, it will be, I suppose, very interesting for you to join, for example, all kinds of events. There will be trips, excursions, dinner parties, and so on. So everything, if you have some interest, everything you need is on the website of the Rubenianum. Thank you so much. I hope I could convince you of the exceptional qualities of Michelina Wautier. Thank you so much.